This week on the Virtual Skeptics, Tim does not have his script on his screen.
Brian would never let this happen.
Bob drinks lead-free Kool-Aid. Eve will never be found by the History Channel. And Tim is a bundle of contradictions and is completely unprepared to be doing this episode. Hi there, everybody. 1 minute late. Here we are. Welcome. And let me get my script up. How are you doing, Bob and Eve?
Doing good. I'm Bob Blaskowitz, CSI's conspiracy guy. And some other shit.
Bob.
Yeah.
Bob did some stuff. Yeah, what have you guys been doing since our momentous 200th episode last week?
Mostly napping because of the exhaustion of from the excitement and
the hangover.
Yeah.
And we stay up late for the fireworks, and it's just.
Yeah.
No.
We went to Philadelphia for a couple of days. We went to Mystery Science Theater live.
Oh yeah. They're coming to Atlanta in August.
It's fun. It's a fun time. And it's campy and it's big. It was a good time. Then we took a day off just as a writing weekend because we have some stuff we have to do for our book, and then we met up with a couple. Eve went to graduate school with one of the couple with the guy, and they do recording. They publish very, very old recordings, including the oldest recording, sound recording ever. So,
which is what, a busy signal?
What was it?
Was cannot go through because telephones have not been invented yet.
Yeah. It's just
what
was it?
It was a sound wave pattern, wasn't it?
I'm not exactly sure what. Yeah, I don't remember, but it was in the New York Times a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I remember. Are these the folks? I remember there was somebody that was doing a thing where there are discs and cylinder recordings that are so old and brittle in the Library of Congress that they're afraid to play them, and that they were doing like super high resolution photos and then using computer stuff to literally figure out.
That sounded like some of the stuff that they were involved.
They were doing.
Yeah, they talked about that. I don't know if they were working with the Library of Congress. The other thing was one recording format. If you play it, it destroys it. It's not permanent.
Right.
Was it on foil or something?
Something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of. It's a big problem. Well, there's just the big problem of for librarians of formats.
And the technology.
Technology is changing, and you have things that here's a critical document, and it's on a floppy disk, and we don't have a floppy drive that'll read this. There is some monstrous cat attacking the show.
It's a Siamese.
I'm
come here.
Go give him some dinner. I'll be back shortly.
Okay, we'll drag the introduction while you do that. So anyway, we're live on the internet, and if you're watching, you can ask us questions in the chat on YouTube, or by using the hashtag Virtual Skeptics. And let me very slowly introduce our somewhat small panel this week. First of all, we've got Bob Blaskowitz, who is CSI's conspiracy guy web columnist, a blogger for Skeptical Humanities and Skepticality contributor. There is me, your substitute host. I blog very rarely at SkepTools and Insight at skeptic.com. I've used to contribute to Skepticality, and I'm the creator of What's the Harm. And our missing panelist who's feeding a cat is Eve Siebert, who is
Yeah.
an editor and blogger at Skeptical Humanities and contributor to Skepticality and Insight at skeptic.com. Here she comes back, just in time. So we have 3 topics for you tonight. We're not going to do a trivia question because I don't have one for you. But we are going to start our topics with Bob.
Yes, today, okay. We were promised the best people. Instead, we got Donald Jr., and he's apparently the smart one. We're all aware of crank magnetism. This is when there's a mutually reinforcing network of con artists and gullible people. Kind of, they find each other and they publish in the same places and support each other's goofy claims. There are a couple of reasons for this. There could be true belief or just going where the customers are, really. Anyway, add to this, to the mix of assholes surrounding our asshole in chief, you can add this guy. You bring up the first image.
Slide.
Mike Adams. Mike Adams is who I actually think looks like a character, this guy, in in the show Sense8, whose name is, get this, Will Gorski. That makes Gorski.
Wow.
Mike Adams. It's like God has a sense of humor and is a casting director. So yeah, so the self-styled health ranger, though publicly styled public health menace, this week offered to take over responsibility for public water testing from the FDA. If you bring up the next image, there's the headline where he announces Health Ranger offers to take over nationwide water quality testing from the EPA, saving taxpayers millions.
Wow.
Yeah,
What
it's a pretty
great
impressive
guy.
claim. Yeah, so he decided that he was going to do this not by going through the normal channels of submitting a bid because there is a need, but he made the appeal directly to Scott Pruitt in a YouTube video on the internet. So, this truly loathsome toilet bowl inhabitant is, of course, seizing upon the Flint water contamination crisis to grandstand. I don't know what his end game is here other than draw attention to himself. He makes appeal. He says that he will test up to 5,000 samples of water per year for a total cost of $1. And yes, it sounds like a scam when he pitches it. And at the low price of $1. He pitches it as he's addressing a government waste problem, and the whole time he is just slobbering over Donald Trump, saying he wants to help make America great again, and he's mad at how the fake news media is criticizing Donald Trump, and Scott, who knows if he believes this, but he's angry. He argues that the EPA is just buying equipment and leaving it in the box so it looks like they need money.
Okay.
I don't even know how that's an argument, right? But that's exactly what he says. He says, quote, "We've already tested over 600 samples. This means that he tests, considering that his business has been open for food safety laboratory has been open for about 2 years, is almost up to a rate of 1 sample per day. Having tested 600 samples, he seems not to realize that there are over 151,000 public water systems in this country feeding people. Not only that, the concentration of contaminants will vary depending on season, meaning that you have to do multiple tests in order to, get and he wants to do this. This suggests to me he's done 600. He has and offers to do up to 5,000 a year. He has literally no idea what he wants to do. I imagine it's like a doula who's delivered a dozen babies or so, and saying that she has a lot of experience in childbirth, whereas the problems that you're gonna see come out of having a very large sample. So you do 1,000 births, you do 2,000 births, and then you'll start to see the whole range of problems that you can have, over time. He has a total overestimation of his own experience and competency, and he touts as part of his qualifications his results having been published in his own in-house journal. So, yeah. He doesn't understand the complexities of the EPA's water research division, which doesn't just test for heavy metals, which he said he can do, but other contaminants. And that analysis goes to protocols and research to inform future water management strategies. And he thinks he can replace that, all of the hydrologists and geologists and agronomists and phrenologists with...
What sort of ologist is he?
Phrenologist.
I forgot.
Phrenologist.
Is he?
He thinks he can substitute, he can serve that role with a white coat and a machine that goes ping. Now,
well, that's all you need to be a scientist, isn't it?
Right, yeah.
That's all you need.
What was funny, I was looking at his advertisement, and some of the, they have him working at equipment, typing with blue gloves on, because whatever. But also, what they showed a tissue analyzer. I looked up the name. When you can see the name, I looked it up. One was a tissue analyzer, and the other was a microscope. It's like, really? You're going to identify heavy metals in water by looking at a microscope? Sure. Anyway, yeah.
Well, if they come out in just chunks of lead, that would work fine, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't they look like little iron bars floating around in there?
Exactly. That say lead on them. Now, he does apparently have a mass spectrometer, but we don't see it in the video. And that's a machine that spits out numbers that you can put on your own website.
Mm.
So the EPA actually, what it does, it sets standards and requirements for other labs who do testing. So they're not really doing the public water testing. Let's say if somebody, there are water testing companies all over the country that test things like well water and municipal water, and that's a contract job. He doesn't seem to realize that. They do, the EPA sets the standards by which those groups are certified. And all he wants to do is to be able to, it'll cost him up to $500,000 of his own money, which he's happy to do to make America great again.
Of course.
Yeah. And all he wants to do is to post the numbers on his website so people can see. And he cites the Flint, Michigan debacle as evidence of, and you do see city officials who would be responsible for doing enforcement being negligent in coordination with one another. So there are conspiracy charges pending against some of the people involved with the Flint water scandal. The EPA isn't, and it's because the EPA doesn't necessarily have statutory authority to do enforcement. Now, whether or not they could go to the public, that's a different story. And I think that was something that they were trying to answer with their lawyers, and their lawyers are fucking slow. I mean, it went from April of 2015 to November or something, so it took a long time. In which case, by that point, there'd been a lot of damage done. So there was hemming and hawing and confusion over what should happen. But it says on the website of the EPA that they don't do enforcement. So, but yeah, so he does this at the Consumer Wellness Center lab, which I guess is like a trailer or maybe a basement or something. I don't know. It's bright. There's a lot of light, and it's mostly white. That is sciencey.
Yeah. It's good to be
So,
well lit.
Yeah, I think so. And
Just
so
keep the little tiny bars.
yeah. Yeah. So that was his pitch, and it just, as far as I can tell, it's a flash in the pan. I haven't seen any follow-up on it or anything. It's just the whole idea is so Mike Adams.
Yeah. Well, it's a no-lose situation. You know, you offer, you seem like a good guy, and then, of course, they don't take your offer, so you don't have to deal with the problem of actually delivering. And if you want to, you can do a second post and say, "Oh, they didn't take my offer." Well, you know,
They're still in on it. They're scared of the truth. Yeah.
What are they trying to hide?
Blah 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 blah.
Water from you,
so
asshole.
dumb.
Yeah, he is really one of the worst people of the web.
Well, it's just amazing to me too when people jump in and comment on stuff like this, and they just have not done their basic civics in terms of, you know, anybody who knows anything about how the government works in the U.S. knows the federal government does not run the water systems. The water systems are all run by local governments
Municipal.
all around the country. And so there's, you know, it's not the EPA that's doing all this testing, and the EPA doesn't turn your water off if the test fails. That's up to local officials in your town, which is exactly why we have things like Flint happening, because local officials in some towns screw up sometimes.
Sometimes hugely.
Sometimes hugely, and other local officials have their act together and know what they're doing.
So, yeah, it was just kind of, it was just another self-aggrandizing ad for himself. You know,
Yeah. Typical Mike.
What can you do? Yeah, Mike Adams. Man of the world.
Instant virtual skeptics topic creator.
Yeah.
Bob, you've gone a bit Dalek-y. Don't know if you can fiddle with your microphone.
Exterminate.
Yeah.
Does that work?
We can understand you. You're just a little buzzy.
Exfoliate.
Yes. Okay. All right.
So,
well,
I'll be mostly quiet.
I don't see.
Well, I just meant maybe you could fiddle with your microphone or something.
Yeah.
How's that?
Nathan likes your Zap Brannigan T-shirt, by the way.
As is right and just.
All right. Well, next up, we are going to have Eve.
Well, as you probably all recall, last week, the internet was abuzz, full of reports of a groundbreaking, mind-boggling event. The History Channel would be airing a show about history. I know.
No.
It seemed ridiculous.
Have aliens taken over the History Channel?
Well, yeah.
Twice this week.
Now, the reporting on this, you know, extraordinary event really lacked skepticism. There was no one saying, "Really? The History Channel doing history? You're sure there won't be aliens?" But it came to pass. The show is called Amelia Earhart: The Lost Evidence, and it mostly deals with old and rather dubious evidence, naturally, that Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan landed in the Marshall Islands, were imprisoned by the Japanese on Saipan, and were eventually killed. Most of the evidence involves people who claim to have seen the landing, or they saw Earhart and Noonan either on the Marshall Islands or in Saipan. One person claimed to have actually seen Noonan beheaded. All but one of the witnesses seem to be dead. So it's mostly old video clips of the people or interviews with relatives or acquaintances who say he or she had no reason to make up the story, which is always super convincing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's also some bits of metal that were found, and they were subjected to a science. And the science showed that they could have come from some sort of plane.
Or in fact, metal.
Well, no, metal that sometimes is used on planes. So it could have been some kind of plane, possibly, or not. But the big news that everyone was talking about was a photograph that allegedly shows Earhart and Noonan and their plane on a barge in the Marshall Islands. If you could bring up the first slide, that is the photograph, complete photograph. Now, I couldn't even figure out where Noonan or the plane were supposed to be until I saw a blown up version of the picture with them circled. So, yeah. The evidence was just that good. It's like that lobby thing over plane. Okay.
Where?
Way over there on the right edge, if you can see my...
Yeah, it's way on the right. Yep.
Okay.
Now, questions of all sorts were raised even before the show aired. Many that have been raised before, because again, this isn't a new theory, and people are aware of the problems with it. But the most damning information concerned the Koshu Maru, which is the ship that's supposed to be on the right of the picture, with the barge behind it with the plane on it. But in 1982, Japanese journalists, and so quite recently, Japanese journalist Fukiko Aoki found a surviving crew member of the Koshu Maru. And he said they and all other Japanese ships were alerted to look for Earhart and Noonan to offer assistance if they found them. Because at the time, they weren't at war with us and didn't particularly wish to piss us off. But they never saw them, and the ship was nowhere near the Marshall Islands at that time. At the time of their disappearance, specifically, it had taken some meteorologists to Greenwich Island, which has a different name now that I can't pronounce. But it's some 1,500 miles away from where the picture is supposed to have been taken.
So that's the steamer up there?
Sure.
Yeah.
And it arrived...
Steamship to the right.
It arrived at Greenwich Island the day of the disappearance. So that was problematic. And that, again, was before the show aired. Then the show aired.
Yeah, it was 1938. No, I'm just kidding.
On Sunday. And I watched it today. So y'all don't have to. Welcome. And I watched it except for the last slightly less than 10 minutes because I was watching on the computer and something went awry. And I couldn't watch the end without watching the whole thing again. And seriously, that was not going to happen. But last I saw, the investigators were looking for bones, which they hoped to have DNA tested and then compared to Earhart's niece's DNA. I'm assuming that this did not actually happen because if they were able to identify bones buried on Saipan as Earhart's, they really buried the lead by focusing on that blurry photograph.
Yep.
Within the first 3 minutes of the show, we hear the main investigator asking what the U.S. government is hiding and saying this could be the biggest government cover-up ever. Because apparently the U.S. government knew all along that the Japanese had Earhart and Noonan, but couldn't do anything because then that would reveal that they had broken Japan's codes and I don't know. It's a whole long conspiracy thing. We also get to see the investigators walking in slow motion. And all that, it just really did not bode well for me. The main investigators are all eminent historians. Just kidding. There's not a historian to be found. Not a historian to be found. There's Sean Henry. He's the main investigator. He's the one who said, "What's the government hiding?" He's a former executive assistant director of the FBI who focused on cyber investigations and is now president and CSO of CrowdStrike, a cybersecurity firm. He repeatedly assesses the credibility of witnesses by noticing where their eyes are looking. It's like, look at his eyes. He's looking up to the left. That means he's trying to remember, not that he's making up stories, for instance.
I am the king of Saipan. No, it doesn't fucking work.
Yeah. He's joined by Colonel Dan Hampton, a former United States Air Force fighter pilot who's done crash investigations. Hampton begins many sentences with the words, "As a pilot," because as a pilot, he knows exactly what Earhart would do in situations they have invented. One of them was, "As a pilot, you always have a backup plan, so she would never have run out of fuel and ditched in the ocean."
Well, no one ever runs out of fuel, obvious.
Yeah, whatever. Special guest expert is Les Kinney, a retired agent for the Department of Treasury, who had worked as a liaison to the CIA and the Pentagon. Presumably all the FBI, the Air Force, the CIA, the Pentagon, Treasury Department are all supposed to impress us with their credibility. But again, not historians. Anyway, since his retirement 10 years ago, he has obsessively, and he did use the word obsession himself, obsessively looked for documents relating to Earhart in the National Archives, to find out what they've been hiding. He said he spent eons there, suggesting that he may not know what the word eons means. Anyway, he also has a buddy who found some metal on Mili Atoll. Anyway, now I tried to figure out what it was that I found so particularly irritating about the show. And I suspected it had something to do with the stench of machismo. Earhart is virtually the only woman in the show. There are a couple women interviewed, but it's a very male. But then I realized that it's like an episode of Ghost Hunters. Not that they're actually looking literally for ghosts, but it's over serious. There's that unearned but steadfast belief in their own competence in the wrong fields. Some somewhat unconvincing, real conversations that are totally not scripted at all in any way. Too much time spent watching them drive places. And then there's the fact that there's really no excuse for the show to be half as long as it actually is. And I think it's a cross between Ghost Hunters and CSI Miami, the one with the ever slappable David Caruso. So they take. I beg your pardon.
A little peanut gallery comment there.
So they take the photo to have some CSI Miami magic done to it, but unfortunately that doesn't exist in the real world. So they can't somehow make it clearly show faces. They can't use facial. Yeah, exactly. They can't use facial recognition on either the alleged Noonan or the alleged Earhart because there's just not enough data, not enough pixels. And if you zoom in, then there's a lot of nothing much there. They do have a guy who shows it's not manipulated at great length, but yeah, whatever. Everyone on the show says that the two people of interest are Caucasian. I'm not really sure how they even established that much, because again, just not that clear. They say the Earhart figure is a woman because her hair is too long for a man and too short for a woman who's a native. And that's the expert opinion from their forensic investigator. He then does some overlays to attempt to show that the man is Noonan, despite the fact that they can't enhance the picture so you can see what he actually looks like. And then since
the one facing the camera,
one of the ones facing the camera, he is right over by the pole or the leaning on the pole. Has receding hairline on this, so he sort of has a.
That really is a crappy picture.
Yeah.
Well, it's. I mean, yeah. And and you can't even see the face of the face of the person who's supposed to be Earhart, because that person's not turned toward the camera really. You can see profile, but so he's assessing that person's back, not even the face. The next slide, if you can bring that up, are the photos he uses to compare backs. You'll notice the backs are not actually in the same position because she's turned slightly toward the camera in the two pictures of actual Earhart. And I didn't get a screenshot of this, but he draws lines showing like where the armpits are compared to where the waist is, and then looking at basically the space in between, which is supposed to match in the three pictures. And it didn't look to me as if it actually did. But you know, what's an inch here or there? It's still the same.
I'm not sure that that's even a woman.
Well, yeah. How can you tell it's a woman?
Yeah. How can you?
How can you tell it's Caucasian? So regardless, it's really unconvincing. And I thought this the first time I saw sort of a blown up picture of what was supposed to be Earhart. The hair's wrong. Maybe you need some women in here because it's wrong. It's too dark. Now, granted, it's not a great photo. That could be, the color or depth of color could be off.
Well, that would have been burned into the negative, though. So I don't know.
So it seems too dark. It's too straight. She has wavy hair in all her pictures, and the style's different. The picture on the left there, the hair looks almost mullety. That the bangs go back almost to the ears, and that's not what Earhart's hair looked like ever, as you can tell, because throughout the program you repeatedly see photographs and film clips of Earhart, and that's not what her hair looks like. It just isn't. But that's his maybe. The real kick in the ghoulies came when it was discovered that Kodo Yamano, a Japanese blogger who focuses on military history, had found the photo in a book published in October 10th, 1935. You can bring up the next slide. Earhart disappeared in July 1937. So that's almost 2 years after the photograph was published in a book. And that's really kind of a problem.
Yep.
Unless there was some time traveling happening. The book is a Japanese travelogue.
Eve.
Yeah.
That's totally possible with the History Channel.
Well, that's true.
Oh, here's the book. Sorry, I had the wrong slide.
Yeah, that's the book, Japanese travelogue about the South Seas, and it has been conveniently digitized by Japan's National Library.
Right.
He was in the wrong archives.
What?
He was in the wrong National Archives.
Exactly.
Right.
According to Yamato,
but you didn't even have to dig through boxes to find this. You could find it online.
Yeah, according to Yamato, it took him up to 30 minutes to find this information. Now,
nice.
What sort of magic did he use to find the photo? He searched on the internet using the words Jaluit Atoll, which is where the photo was supposed to have been taken, and a time frame of the 1930s. He explains the photo was the 10th item that came up.
Nice. Right on the first page of results.
Oh my God. That's so lame. That's so lame.
I was really happy when I saw it. I find it strange that the documentary makers didn't confirm the date of the photograph or the publication in which it originally appeared. That's the first thing they should have done.
Wow.
Now, I think he's being unfair. You can't expect Mr. FBI cybersecurity expert guy who can tell when people are lying to spend half an hour doing a Google search.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
He's a man of action, damn it. He needs to be flying off to an island in the middle of the Pacific to slash vegetation with a machete and dig up bones.
Oh my God. He's
Yeah,
the man so fast his walk has to be slowed down.
Yeah, exactly. So the History Channel is aware of the discovery. My last slide, which may have been up already, they tweeted, "History has a team of investigators exploring the latest developments about Amelia Earhart, and we will be transparent in our findings."
Just like Eric or Don Jr., whatever.
Yeah.
I praise them for their transparency.
Ultimately, historical accuracy is most important to us and our viewers. Now, I expect within the next few days, we'll hear about how it's really the fault of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama.
Sure.
Because Ukraine, I don't know. And I'm not saying that aliens are to blame, but it's totally aliens. However, if historical accuracy is really of paramount importance to them, maybe they should ask historians to do the history instead of retired civil servants with time on their hands and a desire to be on TV. Or maybe they could at least get Billy, the mail clerk, to do a Google search before they air something that purports to be history. I don't know.
Nice.
Oh my God, that is just fractally bad.
Yep, not good. And the weird thing is, before it was completely debunked, I was looking at comments on a Washington Post story, and it's not YouTube, it's not Reddit or 4chan, the Washington Post, and I couldn't believe how invested people were in this. And going, well, you have to look at the overlays. It's really convincing. And of course, anyone who questioned the narrative, it turns out they were all closed-minded. Because if you disagree with something stupid, you are somehow automatically closed-minded. I'm not sure how that works, but that apparently is a truth universally acknowledged.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the classic thing of if you really want to be scientific about something, you need to be thinking about how could I disprove what it is that I think.
Yeah.
And test those things out.
What
would disprove this photo? Well, if we found it somewhere else and it had a different date on it, well, let's see if we can find this photo somewhere else. Just because it was in the National Archives doesn't mean that's the only copy of it.
Right. And the guy who found the photo, the guy from the Treasury, he is really invested in this and has been for a while. And he seemed to be, well convinced that it was a conspiracy. And just looking for evidence for that, and had worked out the scenario in some detail. So yeah, he was not approaching this in the right way. But the other thing is, yes, you need to sort of try to disprove things, but actually, I kind of want to say that science isn't the answer, because it's all full of technology, and they go to their scientific experts and do their science crap, and they need historians or someone.
I mean, that's the guy who did this, was a historian a military historian.
Well, he's a blogger. I don't know that he's
doing military history
historian, but yeah,
right.
But certainly someone with a strong avocation. In military history.
So yeah,
well.
Science can suck it. Science loses again.
Yeah. And if
Well, it's one of those. It's just with those shows, they want to have the big screen, huge big screen TVs that they're doing the touch screen that looks like something out of a movie, except it's actually not that strange now. But that all the shiny bells and whistles of the high tech crap.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and if you followed this at all in the skeptic literature, these guys who've been chasing Amelia Earhart have been at this for years and years and years and years. And there's different batches of them, and it's like the 9/11 truthers. There's this batch that believes she crashed here, and there's this batch that believes the Japanese captured her, and there's this other batch that believes this other thing happened.
She never existed.
And we
found lipstick or something.
Right.
And and it's enough to apparently get lots of donations, but it's never conclusive because, the scenario doesn't really make sense. And I actually think it's sort of like there's an incredible new discovery about Amelia Earhart as often as someone discovers Noah's Ark again. And it always turns out to be nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd seen Brian Dunning commenting on this. I think he has an interest in aviation somehow. And he's looked at the Amelia Earhart truthers in the past, I know. So he was deeply skeptical of it when this surfaced.
Yeah. Well, I think you only had to look at the stupid photograph to be deeply skeptical. It's like, look at no, you can't. No, it could be anyone.
Yeah, and look at how long it's taken them to not find that Boeing 777.
Oh yeah,
that crashed in the South Indian Ocean. And they've been searching for it for what, 3 years now, and that plane is like 100 times bigger than the plane that Amelia Earhart was flying, and had 300 people on it, and all they found is like 2 parts that floated up on a beach. They can't find the rest of this plane. So how do you think you're going to find the wreckage of this tiny little airplane that had 2 people in it that crashed 80 years ago?
Yeah,
totally.
That was actually one of the things that at the beginning when they're doing their conspiracy theory crap, the FBI guy is saying this was the biggest naval search in the history of naval searches, and they found nothing. It's like, big ocean.
Yeah.
Plane.
And they didn't have near the technology we have now. I mean, if they crashed that Electra on the water and it sank in 1937, how are you going to find it? And then how long are they going to last on the surface of the water before they drown?
I mean, that happens too with the Bermuda Triangle stuff, that it making a big deal of it disappeared without a trace.
Yeah.
You mean it sank?
Ocean. Yeah, it crashed. It sank. That's too bad, but.
And, maybe someday we'll find it, but it'll be covered with coral or something.
Not
well,
coral, because that's dying.
Oh, yeah, that's right. All the coral's dying. Maybe that's how we'll find it. All the coral will die. And then
we'll die and we'll find the plane.
Yeah. All right, so I'm the last up, and I'm going to talk about debunking fake news on the internet. Last week I mentioned that I'm a little kind of negative on the idea of building magical tools that will solve problems, and yet at this point, in part because the people who need to be using the tools are the very people who are not going to use them. And yet there are some folks who are expending a great deal of effort trying to build tools to help deal with the misinformation problem on the internet. The Knight Foundation. If you followed me for a long time on Twitter, I've been tweeting about the Knight Foundation's programs for a long time because they fund a lot of interesting things that could affect information and misinformation on the internet. They also fund a lot of other interesting stuff, but they have gotten interested in the fake news problem, and they have something called the Knight Prototype Fund, where they will just drop, you know, $30,000 or $10,000 on somebody who's working on something, and say, here, here's a head start. And their latest round, month or two back, dropped some money on 20 different projects that were all working on fake news and misinformation and trying to debunk things and fact checking and that sort of thing, which is good. It's good. And I actually saw something about another tool that's not Knight funded, but it's funded by, I guess, the EU government through some universities in Europe. And it's a thing called InVid. And what it is it's another one of these Chrome plugins. A lot of these things, Rebutter and Web of Trust and whatnot, operate by being a browser plugin. And this is another reason why I'm a little bit negative about tools these days, is because so much of the way we access the internet has gone to mobile now. Everybody's reading news on one of these. And you don't have the opportunity to put plugins in your browser, at least not to the degree that you do on the desktop. You can do some really cool things with browser plugins on the desktop, but if everybody doesn't read the news on the desktop, it's not going to help you. But this plugin's a little different because this is intended to be used by someone, a more knowledgeable person, like a professional fact checker or a skeptic or somebody who's investigating, or that Japanese blogger. And what it is a plugin for Chrome that basically knows a little bit about how video is embedded on the internet and how to use certain tools like reverse image search and things like that. And it makes some techniques for investigating videos a lot easier, so that if you're not as technical and you don't know how to, for instance, extract the thumbnail out of a YouTube video and then search for the thumbnail using image search, this thing will do that for you. And that's a way, you know, what happens a lot with video on the internet is things get copied. If somebody sees something getting a lot of clicks on YouTube, they'll take it and post it on Facebook and post it on their page and try to get clicks that way, and just basically stealing other people's content. So a lot of times when you see a piece of fake video floating around, or something that claims to be a news thing, you're like 11 levels removed from the original version of the video. So that's one way to kind of work your way back and look at the dates. But it also has a way to dig into the metadata that may be embedded in the video. Like there might be a date that's actually in the video file that'll give you an idea of when that video was posted that might not be visible in the user interface and whatnot. So that's a kind of an interesting tool. And the idea is that if you see a piece of news video, or a particular journalism professionals who might be thinking about using a piece of video in a news story, can do their due diligence using this tool and figure out whether or not it's trustworthy, or at least it is what it claims to be, and is not, and there's nothing inconsistent with what it claims to be. At the same time, another reason that I'm kind of negative about this sort of thing is the very same week I read about this tool, I also read about another tool, and it's a piece of sort of learning software. The other big thing besides misinformation that's all over the place on the net these days is cognitive and AI and learning algorithms. And, you know, you see story after story about how Google has built software that is learning how to classify photos, or how to identify, how to listen to to voice. And these are all trained algorithms. So essentially, you use sometimes a neural net, sometimes other technologies, but essentially you feed it a bunch of known data and say, here, like for instance, here's 10 million pictures of cats. So these are what cats look like. And then you feed it other
higher Eve.
well, yeah. And then you feed it other photos and say, is this a cat? Is this a cat? And then if you can provide a way to give it a feedback mechanism and say, no, that's not a cat, it gets smarter and smarter and smarter, and eventually you have a program that identifies cats. Now, that's kind of a trivial use of it, but you can see how that sort of same technology could be used to, perhaps identify threats, or they're applying the same idea to all sorts of things, like translating languages and stuff like that.
I heard a story of researchers who are using it to identify child pornography on Facebook.
Yes.
That type of thing.
This video, and I'm not sure if it will play, and I know the audio will probably not play, so you probably won't appreciate how the audio
town
works.
hall.
Is what these guys have done is they have given this algorithm training video showing, in this case, President Obama speaking, such that the algorithm can learn how does Mr. Obama move his mouth when he says the letter E, or when he says this phrase or whatever. And the algorithm learns how he moves his mouth. And then what you can actually do to it, and in this case, they've taken video on the left and fed it into the algorithm plus a speech on the right, and made the lip movement on the video on the right match the audio for the video on the left. And it's amazingly good. If you watch it, and you can watch him, it really looks like the video on the right, which was from an unrelated speech, is actually saying the text. And in this case, in this footage right here, this is some really old footage of when he was in college or whenever, speaking about something, and they've taken footage of him as president and animated it to match the voice. And they claim that they're doing this for purposes like, oh, I didn't have that zoomed up, did I? I'll show that to you again with it zoomed up on the screen. They claim that what it's for is for things like, okay, you're on Skype and you want to talk with someone, but maybe your connection right now doesn't handle video too well, but it can handle audio. We could generate your face speaking and match it to your audio so that the person on the other side would see your face speaking and wouldn't have to, worry about, oh, you're breaking up, your picture's breaking up. All that would be handled. But you can obviously see, particularly with this example of President Obama, how this would be just like gold mine for generating fake news, particularly if you could find somebody who could impersonate or at least sound edit. We've already seen where people will take sound snips and snip a word here or a word there and edit audio or video to make it sound as if someone is saying something else. So all you got to do is edit the audio so that it sounds like President Obama is saying something, and then run it through this algorithm, and you can have video of him saying that thing that he never said. And it's very scary because, we already have Photoshop and other ways of faking things. Now we can have completely fake talking heads, and it's going to be very difficult to identify them. And boy, has it gotten dark in my room all of a sudden.
Yeah, what the hell?
I think the sun just set here. Let me turn a light on. Hang on a second.
Blow out of the sky?
You thinking, yeah, ghost hunters. Turn out the light.
There we go. I normally turn that light on, and I hadn't thought about it because the sun was coming in.
I heard the thud of night falling.
Yeah, it was funny as while I was talking, it seemed like everything went dark. So basically the gist of what I have to say tonight is I'm still a little bit pessimistic about the state of skeptical tools at this point, because for every tool that one group builds, it seems like there's an equal opposite tool that someone else is building that's going to make the misinformation problem worse. So we've got a lot of trouble ahead of us. And I remember Daniel Loxton made a big remark one time about a comment I made on a DragonCon panel about skeptics being like firemen. That I had seen somebody saying something to the effect of, well, when is it that skeptics are finally going to get everybody to accept vaccines? And I said, that's like saying, when is it that firemen are going to put out the last fire? It's never going to happen. We're always going to have buildings that catch fire, and we're always going to need a fire department. And it's the exact same thing with skepticism. We always need skepticism. We need as many skeptics as possible. And maybe the answer is not browser plugins, but education programs to teach more people to be skeptics. I don't know, but
we're doomed is what you're saying.
Yeah, we're kind of doomed. I'm sorry to be such a downer. Maybe that was why it was getting so dark in here.
Yeah, it was a metaphor. Suddenly, you're living magical realism.
I was. I totally was. It was weird. All right. So we didn't do book time last week. Do we want to do book time this week, or do we just want to get out of Dodge? What do you guys think?
Let's go.
Okay, let's go. We can actually get out of here on time. Do we have any announcements? Let's see.
I don't think so.
I didn't see any announcements. No.
Sharon Hill, Emerita virtual skeptic, put up a video on her site about stone tapes.
Oh, okay. Yep. She's doing some neat stuff now. Seems like she's gotten her mojo back, doing a lot of podcasts and stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I have noticed that it always happens that in the kind of conference calendar that you sort of have a batch of conferences in the spring, and then you have a batch of conferences in the fall. And it seems like we're kind of heading toward that fall group of conferences. So I encourage you to go look at SkepCon Guide on Twitter or Lanyard and punch in the word skepticism, because there's a bunch of stuff coming up. A couple of skeptic camps got announced. We were having kind of a light schedule on skeptic camps this year, but all of a sudden Skeptic Camp Winnipeg is having one. They haven't had one in a couple of years. And Skeptic Camp Ottawa in September. And the QED folks are having their Skeptic Camp. And as they have for the last 4 years. And, of course, SkepTrack at DragonCon and the European Skeptics Congress is in Warsaw, Poland in September. And QED is coming up in October, and a bunch of other stuff. SciCon in Las Vegas later in October. So there's a whole bunch of cool events coming up. So if you're in any of those cities or can get to them, give it a thought. That's my plug. All right. So we didn't do book time. We didn't have announcements. We don't have any...
no trivia, no video.
Nothing to reveal.
This is just, bare bones virtual skeptics.
Virtual skeptic light.
The ragged edge of virtual skeptics. This isn't finely produced. This is just as it is. Raw.
Yeah. Yep. Ben's asking, did I miss the fidget spinner segment? Did somebody make a comment about fidget spinners earlier today on Twitter?
Oh, Eve did, didn't you?
Oh.
No.
No?
Okay.
No.
Well, we'll save it for
Someone's
later.
just being confusing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep. And Ben's also asking, are there dog feet on the sofa behind me? And yes, there are dog feet back there.
Is there a dog too?
There's 2 dogs. One of them
The secret.
I'm allowed to show you, and the other one I'm not. There's Blue asleep.
Aww.
And then there's dog feet that you can just barely see next to my chair, but I can't show you the rest of that dog because that dog is secret. Long story. All right. So let's put our card up.
Bye.
And get ready to dance. Oops. The Virtual Skeptics is an independent production of What's the Harm.net, Skeptical Humanities, Brian Gregory, ICBS Everywhere, and Doubtful News. Our logo was designed by Sarah Mayhew at sarahmayhew.com, and our theme music, which you're hearing now, is by Musicant and is used with their permission.